Welcome. NOAA has just released its climate update for April of 2022, and this video is a short summary of that report. In a nutshell, this is what's going on. April was the 5th warmest April on record. That's of 143. La Nina is projected to persist through the Northern Hemisphere summer, might even go into the autumn now. The Arctic was the 11th lowest sea ice extent on record. The Antarctic was the 4th lowest sea ice extent. Atmospheric CO2 reached 420 parts per million for the first time. But in itself, that might be a good thing. Here's a continent by continent summary of what's going on. North America had about average temperatures, but there were wildfires in the southwest. Europe was above average. Asia had the hottest April on record. Africa had the 9th hottest April on record, and there were floods in southern Africa. New Zealand and Australia were the 7th hottest, but there was a significant drought in New Zealand. South America was the 12th hottest April on record, and La Nina, as I said, persists. Well, let's take a look at some of the numbers. On the right we have the percentiles map, which shows the temperatures for given pixels with respect to the long-term average. Here, record low temperatures would be dark blue, and you see we have none of those. Record high temperatures would be dark red, and we have quite a few of those. Most of the map is either record high, much above average, or above average. Looking at the actual numbers themselves, globally we were 0.85 degrees centigrade above the 20th century average. Land was 1.4 degrees centigrade above the average for the 20th century, and oceans were 0.63 degrees centigrade. The northern hemisphere was 1.07 degrees centigrade, which was the 5th warmest, and the southern hemisphere was 0.64 degrees centigrade, which is the 9th warmest. I filled in the April 2022 pixel with 5th place, which is demoted both 2018 and 2021 by one slot. It looks as though 2022 is still aiming to become in 6th warmest of all, and we will see how the rest of the year goes. It is certainly beating out the 7th placed year, which is 2018. So we're probably going to have a 6th or 7th place for 2020. Next, we'll take a look at the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere by first looking at the troposphere, which is the layer of atmosphere that stretches from about the surface to about 13 kilometers in height. The average height that it's measuring, therefore, is about 4 kilometers. It shows that the April temperatures increased to plus 0.26 degrees centigrade above the 1991 to 2020 average. His data shows, contrary to many people's claims, an upward trend of 0.14 degrees centigrade per decade, which is a bit lower than the surface temperatures, but is certainly consistent with them. Now we'll deal with everybody's favorite topic, sea ice. In the Arctic, the sea ice was the 11th smallest extent on record, which has actually shown a trend over the last few years of decreasing, which is interesting, but is still below average. The Antarctic, on the other hand, has shown a decrease in the amount of sea ice, making it the 4th smallest, tied with an earlier year. Now, it's often interesting, and nobody seems to can explain why the Antarctic and the Arctic seem to go in opposite directions at the same time. The real problem around here is how long is La Nina going to last? La Nina creates a cooling area in the eastern Pacific, which you probably saw on some of the early maps. And the longer it hangs around, the lower the global temperatures will be. And we've got two sets of models, and they of course disagree with one another. The model on the left shows that La Nina will slowly degrade over the next few months, probably turning into a neutral situation by the end of the year. However, the models seem to be very divergent from one another, and so I don't trust that particularly. The other forecast on the right here shows a much tighter grouping of models, although it has spread a bit since last time, but it shows that we have a persistent La Nina to well beyond the end of this year. Now for everybody's bête noire, carbon dioxide. We have some good news and some bad news here. First, the bad news is that carbon dioxide topped 420 parts per million for the first time in several million years. But the change from April of last year is only 1.18 parts per million. very similar to what we had last month. And that's much lower than the year-to-year averages we've been seeing for quite a while, which have been well over 2 parts per million. So perhaps some of our measures for cutting carbon dioxide are beginning to take effect. Solar cycle 25 is continuing to go rapidly. We're not going into a grand solar minimum, as some people claim, and therefore going into a little ice age. The top figure here is not the usual one. We normally have sunspot numbers there, but this time I've included the F10.7 radio flux, which is another measure of solar activity. The red line you see here is the model that was the prediction for solar cycle 25 based on a similar cycle to solar cycle 24, maybe slightly larger. But you can see the actual data, that's the blue line with the little dots on them, is actually outperforming this by over a factor of 2. So we could be in for a very, very large cycle if this continues. All in all, the sun is producing a great deal of activity. In fact, in April, it produced 3 X flares. That's more than it's done for the rest of the solar cycle so far. 32 M flares, amazing, and 368 C flares. That's more than 10 a day. We also had 159 coronal mass ejections. So the sun is very, very active at the moment, and nothing like what it should be if it were going into a grand solar minimum. So let's summarize what we've learned. La Niña is hanging in there more than expected and could go through to the end of the year. Globally, it was the 5th hottest April on record. The Arctic sea ice is increasing and the Antarctic sea ice is decreasing. Again, something that needs to be explained, and we don't know the answer to that as yet. Solar cycle 25 is far more active than was forecasted, at least so far. So that's it for this report. Until next time, stay safe and goodbye.